Hello, everyone. It's Sage Real Estate and Property Management here, and we're so excited today to share with you John Woodall. He is the inspector for Best Choice Home Inspections, and he does a lot of our inspections. He did this one right here for me, and we're excited to let you learn from him. So, John, I'll let you take it from here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I am John Woodall. I'm owner of Best Choice Home Inspections. I started the company about 12 years ago, and I kind of started the company to take me into my retirement and work as hard as I wanted to, and I've really enjoyed it. Now I don't want to retire. Let's talk a little bit about licensing. If you ever hire a home inspector, make sure they're licensed. Ask them, are you licensed? Because the license isn't just about, a credential. It means that you've been certified, you've passed a background check, and that you are qualified to be there and do that for them. There's a lot of, especially in the early days of home inspection, a lot of guys would just put on a tool belt and a flashlight, and that's not what you want. Let's talk about what a home inspection actually is. By definition, a home inspection is a non-invasive visual examination of a residential property with readily accessible systems and components. I can't tell you how many home inspections I've been on where people have asked me to remove a wall or peel back a carpet or peel back paneling or do something like that. So we really have to be non-invasive. We really have to not damage anything, obviously. But still, there are tools that a good home inspector will have to kind of see through the walls, like infrared. Or if you see a watermark somewhere, you might want to put a moisture meter on it. So make sure whatever home inspector you hire has these tools and knows how to use them and on your behalf. Let's talk about the inspection itself. Now, it's not enough just to point at something and say, hey, that's broken. That's a defect. We want to have three major points on anything that we point out. We want to say, here's a description of the concern. And then we want to note, how important is this? Is it superficial or is it an actual hazard? Like most electrical concerns are hazardous. And these are things, and I've had clients come to me and say, hey, is that something we can ask the seller to fix? And I always defer to the real estate agents, because that is your job, and you have the harder job there to negotiate that into the deal. But so a good professional home inspector will step back from that. And then the third point is we want to offer a recommendation. Here's what we recommend and how this be repaired, or who do the repairing, like a licensed plumber, or especially with electricity, because it can be dangerous, a licensed electrician. And then, we can have other conversations about, well, this is a minor thing, or this is a major thing, or this looks bad, but it's really not a big deal, or this doesn't look bad, but it's a huge expense. So you kind of want to have those conversations, maybe off the record, but as part of the experience, the home inspection experience. Does anyone have any questions right now? Anything that? Okay, why don't we, on the screen here, you'll see that I have this was an actual home inspection that we did back in January. And this will kind of we'll go through the process of what to expect when you get a home inspection. Now, every home inspector might choose a different software. When I started the company, I did a lot of research, and I chose Report Host. It had templates that you could edit, and it presented it in such a way that, well, you'll see here, there's lots of pictures and language that is layman's terms. These are written for people, not for lawyers, not for home inspectors. So I made this choice, and this is what Report Host looks like. So this was a property that we did here in Cincinnati. And, we have a brief description of the process and some the property and some disclaimers here and things like that. But as we move down, the first topic is going to be general information, and it's just that. And it talks about things that you might not expect, like what were the weather conditions that day? Is it a single family or multifamily? The year is also relevant because that points to, are we going to be looking at knob and tube wiring from the 1940s? Or is it a modern home? When I say modern, I'm thinking 1990s and beyond, where we don't have to worry about knob and tube, and we also don't have to worry about toxins like mold, or I'm sorry, asbestos, lead, things like this. They're not going to be typically after 1978 with the lead and asbestos before that. Weather conditions are important because let's say you're doing a stone foundation, if there's a little water in the basement, you're not going to be overly concerned. That would be kind of normal. But if it's been July and dry for 3 weeks and there's water in the basement, then we've got to talk about that and note it. So that's kind of just general information. As we go down, we talk about most home inspectors. I always start outside. And you want to do that because you want to look at the way the house sits on the land. Is it in a bowl where all the water is running down toward the house? Ideally not. And you want to note the way water moves around that house. It's really important. Water is the enemy. So here you'll see the site profile. And sometimes if there's sidewalk or driveway conditions, like I'm sure you've all seen driveways that go down into the house. And these are things we kind of want to look at and note, well, how is that water being managed once it gets down to the bottom of the driveway? Things like that. And as we go on, exterior foundation. Well, so as you're walking around the house, you're noting the exterior. What is it? Is it vinyl siding, aluminum, stone, brick, things like this. And they all have their own unique concerns that we would address in this segment. Also, what's the house? How is the house built? Wood frame is, a lot of house, but some are masonry, and things like this are notable more for structural concerns, which we'll get into a little bit later. Stone foundations, masonry foundations are very unforgiving of movement. So that's good and bad. It's good in the sense that you'll see cracks because, they show them, and then bad, of course, because they're more expensive to fix. Wood frame is more forgiving. It can expand and contract and move a little bit, and not as expensive to repair. So we note those as we go through the inspection process. You'll see on this one we had some loose siding, and we're pointing out the three aspects of why that's important and what we recommend to deal with it, as we will all concerns. So this house, as I'm recalling, had a lot of siding issues, and you can see those there. Paint and stain is relevant because if your paint, especially on a wood surface, if your paint or stain starts to disintegrate, then the next thing to go is the wood and the structure itself. So we kind of move through that. When we get to the exterior doors and stairs, well, I guess it's self-evident, but we want to note, if it's a solid core wood door, let's note the stain and paint finish, because then that's going to be subject to fungal rot and things like that. Most modern houses have the solid core metal veneer doors that I'm sure you've all seen. And then we just note their condition. And moving on, decks, porches, patios, very concerning for decks if they're not built right. You'd be surprised how many people will throw up a deck on a weekend with their buddies. And, well, they're often not framed right, or foundations aren't right, the piers aren't right. And obviously, you've probably seen those decks too, and they sink after about 3 years, and you've got those problems to deal with. We'll note maintenance issues. Any of you who've owned a deck or had a deck, every 3 or 4 years, you've got to, the wood decks, that is, you've got to maintain them, treat them, seal them, etc. In the reports, I'll note what the deck's made of, and love the Trex or the PVC decking. That is a great product. I have it myself, relatively maintenance free. And if a deck is in a real bad way, I encourage my clients to go in that direction if they can. But noting the structure, handrails, things like this, these can fall into the hazard category, and That's obviously something we want to note. And my understanding is, and again, I'll defer to the agent, but if it is a hazard, and let me ask you, if it is a hazard, is it usually incumbent upon the seller, or is that just sort of a gray area? Or
I think it depends on the totality of the contract, right? Like if you're paying asking price, or very close to it, then yes.
yeah,
it's all negotiable.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
and that's why I defer to the agent.
Yeah.
Roofs, obviously, very important, and not just because of the potential for water damage, which can lead to mold, mildew, fungal rot, but they're very expensive. So this is one of the things you want to make sure on the property that you're buying, that your home inspector takes a really good look at this, either goes up there, flies it with a drone, a mixture of both. I climb out windows, I climb on roofs. I do have a drone, but the drone's actually not my first choice. I prefer to walk that deck. There are things you can feel under your feet that you can't get with a drone. This property here that we're using as an example, it looks like it had a rubber roof here. We see that the seams in this image 5.2 were starting to go. And I don't recall, when we get down a little further, there'll be interior shots. If we had interior moisture, that'll be noted there. But right now we're still focused on the exterior and the roof. So there were a couple notes here, but we want to note specifically the condition of it. The home inspector an experienced home inspector has seen enough roofs to know about how old it is. And they should be able to offer that estimate for you. And it's important because, the average lifespan of a asphalt roof, which is a typical roof, is about 25 to 30 years. And if you know your roof is aging out and the home inspector says, hey, this roof is about 40 years old, then that's the next major expense you're going to have at that property. And you need to know that an average roof these days is $15,000-$20,000. And that's for, a 2,000 square foot home. You start getting into, larger, more custom homes, then they can get very expensive. And again, that's asphalt. We're not talking about slate, tile, metal roofs, things like that. Let's go on down here. This house was a hybrid. It had a couple of different roofs on it. Let's see, what was the issue with this one?
Oh my God, this is so.
We had downspout issues with this one as well. Now this goes back to walking around the exterior, and again, water being the enemy of all structures. We want to note how that water is moving around the property and if it's moving around the property effectively, and that all has to be managed and maintained. This was interesting. I got up on this roof and they had a hatch up there that they had set this old chimney pot on. These chimney pots are beautiful. You see them on old homes, but if they're not being used appropriately, then maybe we do away with them and move to a more modern chimney.
Did they just put it up there to hold the hatch down?
Yeah, in this case, that's what they did. I think they had it up there and they were looking for a weight and they didn't want that hatch to blow away.
Whoa.
But
it could roll up, right?
Yeah. Now here's some other, this is the same roof, obviously, and we had other chimney hatches that were intact, but we see this crown and we know that ice and water can get in here, get down this masonry chimney. Masonry chimneys do not tolerate water very well. We've learned a lot over the last 100 years about how carbon monoxide can mix with water and creates carbonic acid and just eats these things from the inside out. So rain caps have become the modern standard, and I always encourage them when I don't see them. Now, any architect would probably say, well, it's a crime to put a rain cap on this beautiful 100-year-old chimney pot, but that's a different conversation. Let's move on. These fireplaces were taken out of service. The home inspector wants to note that because obviously it's an egress for creatures, and it's also a thermal barrier. If they're open, you can lose a lot of energy out your fireplace. So if they are taken out of service, it's nice to see that they're sealed. And then going back to the chimneys, if they're not in service, I recommend we seal those as well. Typically, like this home, the chimney was being used partially by a water heater and a furnace, and then some of the chimneys with the old fireplaces were shut down. But that's all something that should be noted by your home inspectors, just part of a general home inspection. Basements obviously are critical for many reasons. Structural, we'll find those problems here. Water penetration, see that here. Often if there's mold and mildew, it will be found here. And usually termites are found here as well, or at least the origin point of the termite. So that's all very critical. This house looks like efflorescence is sort of like where this was an old stone foundation and a little bit of water. Efflorescence is like a sponge. You can put water on one side, it'll soak through to the other side, and that's what we're seeing here. And this condition can usually be taken care of with a dehumidifier and some good paint sealant. This basement wasn't too bad, as I recall. I don't want to skip over electrical here. It looks like there weren't a lot of electrical problems. Electrically, though, the home inspector should be noting the type of service, were the wires underground, overground, what were the main, what's the main amperage for the home? And that's relevant because what if the buyer wants to, add a hot tub or, another addition or something. If they're going to need more juice, they kind of need to know what's there now and, what they can look at. They're probably going to need a new electric panel and, things like this. Now, it looks like we did have some exposed knob and tube in this property, and that's noted here in 12. And then there we see the knob and tube in the images. That's an electric tester here where my mouse is, and indicating that it's hot. So it was in service. And then, insurance companies don't like knob and tube.
Can you say what knob and tube is?
That can affect the loan because let's say if it's a HUD or an FHA loan or a VA loan, they really, really care about that. So that usually has to be taken care of, ASAP. I could go on and on about knob and tube, but we'll leave it at that for now.
Hey, John.
Yes.
Could you just briefly say why knob and tube is not something you want in your house?
Yeah, well, it's ungrounded. So you can have an old house that has some knob and tube, but where the wet areas are, the kitchens and the baths, we have got to have grounds. And you want to see those GFCI, the plugs, the little push button plugs that I'm sure you've all seen. We want to see those there in the wet areas. The rule of thumb is generally arm's reach. So if you can touch the plug in the water at the same time, it ought to be a GFCI. You could also do arc fault circuit interrupters, which are on the electric panel itself, but that's more the future. Codes are moving that way, but let's stick to just having protection on grounded plugs and circuitry that's near a wet area. And that also applies to the exterior. If we have a plug outside, we want to make sure it's grounded, has GFCI protection, and a weather guard too. We don't want it to get wet. But that's why it's so important. Going back to insurance companies for a minute, they're okay with it being out of sight, out of mind. So in other words, if it's in the wall running up to your dining room to a two-prong plug where you're only going to plug in a fan or a light, a two-prong plug, it really is not a significant problem. But we don't want it here, as seen in these images, where you could poke it with a stick. You could see it, you could touch it. So we really want this area to be boxed up and replaced with Romex, even if it's ungrounded, and then take that up the wall. What I'm getting at is you don't have to necessarily, on an old home, there's no obligation to bring it up to modern codes, but there is an obligation to make it safe. So that's the distinction. Any other questions about knob and tube or electric in general? We might touch on some more here as we go.
Maybe this isn't a fair question to ask you, but do you know about, on average, how much it can cost to replace knob and tube?
Well, It's a variable. Obviously, it depends on
Yeah.
how extensive it is. But I've had a few homes done myself. I flipped a lot of homes prior to starting this business. And let's look at these images. Let's just say it's isolated to these areas. So what the electrician would do, and I would recommend a licensed electrician doing this, they would likely replace what knob and tube we can see here with new Romex, new wire. And then they would take that over to the edge of the foundation or the wall and put a junction box there and then tie the new wire to the old wire. Now, yes, it's ungrounded going up that wall, and that will hopefully lead to ungrounded plugs that we don't care about. Again, the dining room, the living room, two-prong plugs. We want to replace that wire again with the grounded plugs that need to be grounded at the kitchens and baths and wet areas. But back to your question, if you're not replacing a whole bunch of Romex and doing a whole bunch of junction boxes, you could probably solve this problem for $1,500. But again, if the whole basement has to be pooled, well, obviously the costs escalate.
Yeah.
But if there were a drop ceiling here, or no, let's not talk about drop ceilings. If there were a drywall ceiling here or a sealed ceiling, then it would be less important. Again, it would be like the wall where you can't see it or poke it with a stick. So out of sight, out of mind, as long as we have the grounds where we need them. Let's see, it looks like, what was the deal here? Oh, I think the ground wire came loose on this substandard with ground wire to the water line. Yeah, so what happened here was the ground wire, they had run a ground wire separately. Sometimes I will say not licensed electricians will do this where it's a cheat kind of where they'll run a ground wire to connect to the plumbing and then run that wire to a plug by the bathroom so that they can get a grounded plug there. And rather than running brand new wire that is grounded or Romex. Now, that's a separate issue than having your electric panel grounded to the plumbing. And that should always be the case, regardless of how old the house is. That panel should have been upgraded and grounded to the plumbing. And in modern homes, you want a ground rod outside as well. You want two grounds. In older homes, you'll often see one and not the other, but I always recommend that you have two grounds. Did I divert there, or did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So yeah, then I go on. It looks like I'm talking about the light fans, and this is important because what if that fan falls? But also, we're not necessarily running new wire, but we're stabilizing that fan and making it safe. So that would classify as a hazard if it's not properly secured. And then we're going to point out the defect with the fan. In other words, the pull chain was gone. You can't turn the thing off and on. So simple but important. We're in plumbing now. Here we want to note where everything is, because the homeowner, you'd be surprised how many people don't know where their water main is. And if a line breaks up in your upstairs bathroom, you've got to turn that off quick. So you don't want to be searching for your main. So the home inspector should always point that out. If the client's there, point it out with them and always put it in the report. And, again, in doing a home inspection, I like to have my clients present because there is so much to be learned from the experience, just walking around with a home inspector and seeing where things are and what to do about this and what to do about that. And I think it's critical information. Now, I'm always amazed to hear from either clients or real estate agents that there are home inspectors out there that don't like anyone around. They like to work around. And I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that. But there's a lot of value in being there. And I encourage, no matter who you hire to do your home inspection, I encourage you to be there. So as you can see here, I made a note that it's public water. We're not dealing with a well. That's a whole nother thing. And then we've got our main shutoff in the basement. Don't cover it with boxes. Everything appeared serviceable. I note the type of plumbing. Here we had copper and PEX, so we sort of had a hybrid system. PEX, for those of you that don't know, is that more modern It's basically like a PVC type product. It's a polyethylene something, but it's nice. It's modern. The nice thing about PEX is if you freeze copper, it can rupture, and PEX won't do that. It has a little bit of elasticity to it. It's also great in earthquakes, but that's not too much of a concern here. But it can handle freezing, and we like that. General conditions, yeah. So we made those notes. Now here we had lead. So this was an older home, and that's something you want to note. Now, in the city of Cincinnati, or I believe the state of Ohio, and maybe across the nation, the water companies are going around and replacing the lead at their expense. And I hope it stays that way. But so I encourage my clients to make that call first, find out if you're on the schedule. If not, get on the schedule. But know that you currently have lead pipe coming in from the street. And you can see where it comes in at the basement foundation here, and then it taps into the water meter here, and then we're copper from there on until it meets the PEX. So this is the concern, the lead underground and at the meter and then to the street. And that's what the water company will be replacing systematically. And hopefully we'll stop seeing this in the next few years. But I encourage my clients just to know it's there, but also there are some really good high-tech water filters available that can filter out heavy metals and just about anything these days. So that's the short-term fix until you can get this lead replaced. Then other issues we're looking for, we don't want to see open pipes in your basement floor. It could be, especially in older homes where they would mix groundwater with sewage water. But that means that creatures that get into sewer, we're talking about rats here, they come up and they will, if they have an egress, they'll find it.
Yes.
Everyone who lives in Clifton knows that if you don't have a drain cap, you will have rats in your basement.
And toilets too, right?
And well, yeah, they swim, don't they?
They do come up those toilets in the basement.
That's an aggressive. Yeah. So I always note that. I think most home inspectors do. We did a sewer scope at this inspection, and when we get through this, I want to show you a little segment on that. We'll do a little video thing, and you can kind of see what we saw here. There were some issues that were found. These can be very expensive problems. Basically, you're busting up the concrete, digging up the pipe. Sometimes that can extend under the foundation. Sometimes that can extend all the way to the street, and that can get expensive. I paid for one about 15 years ago, and it was $9,000 back then. So that was for about a 15-foot one. Wow. So you can only imagine what it is now. I haven't paid for one in a long time, but they get into the thousands very quickly. So you need to know about this before you buy the house. Let me just say this about that. A sewer scope is probably always a good idea, but I think if your home is older than, say, 1980, I would almost insist on it, because you're getting into the older pipe, cast iron, clay, and that's where the real problems can arise. Now, I have seen in new construction where a concrete truck backed over brand new PVC pipe. We ran a sewer scope and we saw a collapse, but that's an isolated incident. But if you have any suspicion that there's a problem with the drain line, and I always run the run the line. Like, see that the utility sink there? I would run that for 5-7 minutes, full blast, and just listen for gurgling, make sure we got good flow. Any home inspector should be doing that regardless of the sewer scope. And you kind of get a hint of the condition of the pipes. But anything prior to 1980, I would get a sewer scope. These are really expensive problems that you want to get in front of or know about before you buy the home. Now, all the mechanics, water heater, the furnace, which we're going to get to, we want to know, how old is it? Who's the manufacturer? Some manufacturers are better than others. Is it gas? Is it electric? Things like that. So you got a 40-gallon gas tank here, that could accommodate a family of 4 probably with no problems. But 6 people, you might want to bump that up a little. Also, water heaters are expensive, so we want to know we have no issues with it, or how old is it? Are we going to be replacing that in the next few years?
Do you check and see
I'm
if
sorry.
do you check and see if it's a gas water heater? Do you check and make sure it's not leaking carbon?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Thank you, Randy. I carry, I call it a sniffer, but it's basically a CO2 and a gas detector. And when I'm running these things, well, first you always trust your nose, and that'll give you a clue. But when I'm running these things, both the furnace, if it's a gas furnace, and the water heater, I'll sniff the areas where the carbon monoxide's escaping or getting out and running up the flue, and just make sure that there's no leaks and nothing crazy going on. I'll often do that at connections around the oven or gas appliances as well, where that little hose goes in the back of the oven. Sometimes you've probably walked into a kitchen and gotten a little hint of gas, and that's usually where it's coming from. So same thing with the HVAC system, which is both the air conditioner and the furnace. Now, this is a train. Love trains, top of the line, 2020. I would tell this client, I mean, we'll check it out, but I would tell this client, you're not going to have any problems for 20 years. These are great systems. Just keep them properly maintained. And let's see, it looks like the furnace was a 2020 train. The manufacturer was a 2019 train. So they were probably put in at the same time in 2020. We know that. And they're really good systems. So I think this client's not going to have anything to worry about. Oh, what did I say here?
It was actually not working.
Yeah, sorry. I got ahead of myself, didn't I?
It was something going on, but they fixed it, and it has been working great since.
Yeah, but what we know about the train is it is a good system, relatively new at 2020. But I did notice that we want to see a nice blue, clean flame, and by clean, I mean it's not fluttering. It's smooth, and we're not seeing a lot of yellow or hearing a lot of poops and things like that. So apparently we did. Yeah. Or roll out, where
why is that important?
Well, it's kind of like a carburetor on an old car, that the flow of oxygen and gas needs to be adjusted evenly. And if it's not, then there's efficiency issues and maybe carbon monoxide issues. So this one probably had that problem. Probably needed a little tuning. I called for servicing, and to get a system service, maybe a couple $100, $250, and they'll do all this for you. Now, I recommend to my clients that all HVAC systems be serviced every 4 to 5 years. And a quick note on that: just 2 summers ago, very hot summer, my air conditioner coolant had run low, and I got like a $1,200 bill from Duke one hot August. So I always encourage my when they're doing the servicing, hey, check that coolant level, and that way that won't happen to you. And I actually put it in the report. Make sure that it's serviced and that they check the coolant level. We did have some issues here.
It wasn't going over 50. And I think that's what they did, was cleaned it.
Yeah. And
from what I remember, and then it worked great. So I think exactly what you're saying is what they did.
Yeah, which goes back to the maintenance. You really have to stay on top of these things. I have an income property over. Anyway, the tenant didn't replace the filter, and I got a call that the furnace wasn't working. Anyway, we quickly figured out it was because the filter was clogged. You can break these things by not maintaining them, and they're very expensive, obviously. So let's get them serviced and do routine maintenance, changing the filter. If you have a humidifier, you want to change those humidifier pads. Here's where I note that in the report. The last service date of the HVAC system appeared to be more than 5 years ago. So I recommend that. And here's a note where make sure the coolant pressure is checked in the line set. This is the line set here, and that's where the guy will put the pressure gauge on there and make sure everything is running correctly. Here's the HVAC system. Oh, this was a multifamily, wasn't it? Yeah, I'm remembering that now. Sorry. So we had a couple different systems here. This is not the train. This is an older model. And then I always look in some of the ducts. Especially with rental properties, a lot of times you find really nasty things in there. And if you've got turnover, obviously, if you're buying the property, there's turnover. You don't want to be breathing all this old stuff that, is nasty stuff that's in the ductwork. If I see mold or mildew, I'll point that out. And that's a whole nother topic, but we're going to want to have them fumigated and kill that bacteria so you're not breathing it. Usually, for most homes without mold, you can just vacuum these things out with a shop vac, and that'll be adequate. There are companies that do professional cleanings where they go down the whole thing, and that's great if you want to do that. Probably a good idea for rental properties where you have a lot of turnover. Or pets, a lot of dog hair and things like that in there. If you have allergies, that's a consideration. So things like that. This was a cold day. It was January, so you can't run the air conditioners when it's really cold. You can break them. Sometimes I'll turn them on for just a few seconds to make sure they kick on and that the thermostat, those systems are operating. Mm-hmm. I can't check the system. You don't want to run them when it's cold. They can't be really checked. So I'll say, let's do that later. Do we get to the laundry section? If there is a laundry, looks like we had one in the basement. Looks like we had no issues, but things to check there might be the gas line to the dryer, if there is one. I always check serial numbers on all the appliances with kitchen, laundry, and also the water heater and the furnace too. And with that, I'm verifying the age, but I'm also checking for recalls. So I want my client to know what they're buying. If there's been a recall, I want them to know what they've got ahead of them. Now, sure, the recall will pay for it, but it's a hassle. Believe me, I've done it. And there's usually a charge for this or that. But anyway, it's good information. So now we move upstairs from the basement and everything down there. That's where the home inspector will spend most of their time, by the way, in the basement. The kitchen. So here again, I'll check serial numbers on everything. I'll note the manufacturer and the date of the appliances. Looks like here the sprayer wasn't working good. I think it was this flange. So what can happen is water pools here and it goes down here where my mouse is at the flange for the sprayer, and it ends up underneath your sink and your cabinet. And now you've got potentially mold, mildew, fungal rot, things like that. Water is the enemy. Moving on. Okay, the bathrooms, each one individually. We'll note, what are the products used. This one, cultured marble, is the manufactured countertops that you see off the shelf in Lowe's. They're not made out of marble. I don't know why they call them that. Right. But, if it were granite, I would note that, or tile, or, there's so many products out there for mica. So we note that in the report. If there's an issue, like here, it'll say, condition of the toilet, see comments below, and then we'll go on down and we'll look at that. I always note, now in older homes, there's often not ventilation fans in bathrooms that create a lot of moisture, meaning a shower or a tub. Back in the old days, 100 years ago, a lot of people didn't take showers. Everybody kind of bathed, and that's just how they did it back then. Also, they would crack a window. So what you find in old homes is no ventilation fans. Now, I always recommend them, but I put a note in here, again, what I was saying earlier, there's no obligation to bring it up to modern codes, but I think the home inspector has an obligation to mention these things. Let's say the buyer wants to remodel the bathroom. Well, hey, that would be a great time to put in a ventilation fan at minimal cost. So you'll see that in there. And here we've got the toilet issue. It looks like, let's see, what was the deal with that? Oh, simple, the seat was loose, no big deal. We can, if you're buying a home, you better own a screwdriver. If not, go get one. Now, substandard caulking, I always look at that very carefully, and most home inspectors should. If water gets behind there, we've got all those problems that we've talked about. So, caulk is one of those things. It has to be maintained and noted. So you always see that in my reports. Um, Okay, obvious things like, a home inspector should be running that bathtub and that sink because you're going to know, right? So we had a clog here or a slow drain. And again, easy problem to solve, but very important. And you really need to know that if you're buying the home. Here we get into the interior ceilings, walls, and floors. And this is where we would, find maybe those water issues that, were coming from the roof, the attic, somewhere else. The windows, the siding. Let's see. Looks like we didn't have a whole lot of wet issues. Loose paneling. Again, this was an old house, and with plaster lapping, it can get loose over the years. And a lot of folks, rather than tear it all out and re-drywall, they'll put paneling over it, and then you get loose paneling and things like that. So again, it's not enough to read it on the report. It's here, it's noted, and you can see what's going on. But if you were there at the inspection, the inspector would be talking to you about what's under that paneling. And an experienced inspector should know without looking at it. Made notes on the floor. We had some issues. A lot of this is cosmetic concerns, but still a notable defect. And an expense if, and the buyer has to make these calls. Well, do I want to repair that or replace it or, and those are conversations that you have, but that might be more a conversation that ends up being between the buyer and the realtor and the seller. So, as part of the negotiation process, but it looks like we had quite a few here. Again, older homes often don't have level floors. It's been a lot of, not that it's structurally unsound, just that, things move over the years. I tell my clients that unless there's a obvious issue with ongoing movement, typically a home that's been around more than 30 years has settled, and you're not going to see a lot more movement. So if the problems can be addressed at that point, every situation's unique, but I'm kind of making general statements here, regarding. We talk about doors and windows. Windows are obviously very important. They're very expensive to replace. You've probably all seen windows that fog up where the seals get broken between the layered panels of glass. And it looks like we had a couple here. The energy loss on these is not significant. It's more the aesthetic, though, especially if it were like at your kitchen window, you're at the sink and you're looking out that window every day. You don't want to see a fogged window, but they're always noted in the report. And a repair, there are companies that can come out and replace this glass for a couple $100 to replace the whole window, maybe 500. And this, when I throw these numbers around, this is for a like kind vinyl replacement window, not $1,000 Pella. So we're always talking like kind. And again, this goes back to the conversations that we'd be having on site, if we were together doing a home inspection. So we had a few of those problems, all noted. I'm very specific about, at the attic, front bedroom, side window. I want the buyer to know exactly what window and where it was. So often my reports can be used. After the deal is done, they'll throw the report to the contractor and say, make it right. And then they'll use the reports as a punch list. And that works very well because they've got the description of what's wrong and where it is. So they're a good utilitarian tool as well. More notes on windows. What was the specific problem? Well, that window wouldn't stay open. That one had a bad spring. Now, this is really significant as we look out here. When I say coil work, I'm talking about the aluminum that, when they put in a new window on an old house, they bend coil on site and caulk it in and make it tight, make those windows watertight. But here we can see this window was probably done a long time ago, and the coils come apart. Now water is getting in behind the window and behind the siding. So you can see that's a pretty big gap here where my mouse is. And that needs to be addressed. Here I put my fingers down there so you could kind of see in the picture. But very significant. We cannot let water get in the wall. And I didn't see any brown spots on the walls. I I went around and tested them. So maybe we're lucky, or maybe they just didn't manifest. But that's a big little problem, and it needs to be addressed. Do you guys remember how that turned out?
We haven't even started the repairs yet.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I was curious. I thought I'd ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. The coil guy needs to get up there and tighten this up. More windows. Looks like, yeah, older homes are going to have a lot of window issues. So make sure that those don't bite you as you're getting your home inspection done. Make sure you see the home inspector go around and check every single window. Raise it, lower it. Does it close properly? Does it lock properly? And, then obviously, is it broken? Looks like we had, bad screens here. I point those out too. They're not superficial. I mean, a screen's a real deal, and they can cost $50 each if you have to have one manufactured, for that specific window. In the attic, I'm looking for water penetration, brown spots on the ceiling. In this case, the attic was sort of partially finished, so you could spot things like that. I will, if it's a finished attic like this and I can't see through the drywall, I'll hit it with infrared and I'll look for dark spots, which is an indication of a cold spot. And that could mean there's a bare spot of insulation. It could also mean water. Now, as you learn to read infrared signatures, you can spot water. It looks like somebody spilled a drink. It's fairly obvious. Maybe I've got a shot in here. Yeah. So here we're looking at, this is more about insulation. And you can tell because, see, they're even squares. You can see the joist. So we know they could have insulated better there. Water spots are a little bit different. Like I said, it would look purple spot like a spilled drink. So this was, I don't see any of that here. I think this was more about, we could use better insulation here. At the time of this report, I do remember that furnace just couldn't keep up. So I think it was, at the time anyway, I thought it was a mix of poor insulation, some poor windows, and then the furnace itself had a problem. And I think we sorted that out. You were saying that they fixed it. They took care of it. This is something I throw in at the end of my report because, a lot of my clients are first-time home buyers, and I really like to talk about the difference between a big deal and a little deal and what really matters. So, and real estate agents like to talk about this as well, because you can't, well, you can do whatever you want, but you don't want to kill a deal on a house that you may really love because you don't like the carpet. I mean, let's keep things in perspective. So this sort of outlines that and talks about what's a big deal and what's a little deal. So I include that in every report. And I think it's a good idea to either have the conversation or include it. So that kind of, this is a typical report. Well, actually, this is not a typical report. This is an old house. So this was probably a good report to look at because it had unique issues. Modern homes aren't going to have stone foundations and, things like this. But it was a beautiful old home and, it had its issues. Why don't we, do you have any questions about this report specifically or this home or anything in general regarding that? We did a sewer scope inspection on this one, as I was saying before, and why don't we take a look at that? Let me see if I can.
Brandy, how did it turn out? How'd the negotiations go with this inspection?
Yeah, this one we just had them fix the furnace, honestly, because they weren't really concerned with a lot of this stuff. And we had already offered less than asking. So,
yeah. Can you guys see the sewer scope instead I have here?
No.
Is that showing up on the?
No, I think you have to stop sharing and then reshare the new tab.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Bear with me a moment. I think this is worth. I think this is worth seeing. So we'll stop sharing and then we'll start sharing again. Forgive me. Okay. Oh no.
That's it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Where is my sewer scope? Oh, are you seeing it?
Right there.
Yeah,
we see it.
Okay.
Looks like a sewer scope.
I've lost you guys. bring the call back here. Oh, okay, here we are. Forgive me. All right, so this thing is 6 minutes long, so I didn't want to share the whole thing, but this was an older house, same house, by the way. And going in, like I was mentioning before, we're going to be dealing with cast iron and clay, and clay. I mean, great, it's around for 100 years or longer, and it can withstand the elements underground, but it's very, they're basically in 4 or 5 foot segments, and they're just kind of pieced together with seams, and water leaks, and then the roots find them, and that's what we experience. So let's see, where am I? I want to start this. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. I don't see the play button for
Oh
the.
no. Maybe you just move your mouse around.
Oops. Can you guys see that?
Yes. I mean, we see the pipe.
Yeah. Well, that's no fun.
Maybe press the space bar.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I'm going to do the stop sharing thing again. Bear with me. Yeah, I see. Okay, in the screen that I'm looking at now, I see the.
Play button. Maybe just start playing it and then just share the screen.
Yeah, let's try that, and then I'll do the. There we go. Now we're seeing some movement, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. So, yeah, let's just watch this for a second. So we're going down the clay pipe. We see a seam here. I guess you guys can see my mouth. There's a seam. I always run the water when I'm doing these, so I can see how it's moving down the pipe. These are fun to watch. If you ever go to a home inspection, try to be there and watch this, because you'll see what the inspector sees. And okay, so look here, we've got an offset where the seams are coming apart. Now this isn't really bad. I've seen much worse, but this is where roots will find themselves in. So we keep going down the line, and we're starting to see some debris and some roots find their way in. We'll let this keep playing. We're going to get to a root section here that I think is worth seeing. Let me see if I can move it up a little bit. Yeah, right here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the same segment.
Yeah, that's the worst part.
Oh yeah, here's the one. Oh dear. Here's the one that concerned me more. Oops, there, right there.
Mm-hmm.
That was a little bit more egregious roots. Pulling back, you can see a little bit more. Now, my perspective on this is this house was over 100 years old. This pipe is probably not worth digging up and replacing because we didn't find cracks, broken pipe, really bad roots that would create a clog. This is kind of a normal 100-year-old pipe. So as bad as it looks, it's not horrible. There are options that if as we go through the process of the home inspection, if we were having this conversation, I said, well, I would recommend a licensed plumber who does this kind of work.
That's you.
Look at it and give you an estimate if you feel it's necessary. I don't feel that this one is necessary, but there are options like lining the pipe is one, much cheaper than they basically put a fire hose down there impregnated with epoxy and then blow it up. It hugs the wall of the pipe, and now you've got a clean lined pipe. That saves you from digging up the yard and killing that 100-year-old maple tree out front. But digging up the yard is the other option, very expensive. Let me get rid of this screen.
I have a question, John. When I bought my house, they said you should use Root X every 3 months just for maintenance. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, and that's what I did to a house that I had previously, and I actually learned that from the plumber. I'm sorry, bear with me a second. I'm trying to bring the call back. Okay, here we are. Yeah, so what you can do, and rock salt's another good one, by the way. Less chemicals, and it will kill the roots. So I used to pour rock salt down mine every few months, or if I noticed it was starting to get slow, because we didn't want to spend the money on digging up the pipe, and we knew what was going on, and we knew how bad it was, or not how bad it wasn't. But I've gone both ways on that. But these are conversations that you want to have with your home inspector and maybe ultimately the plumber who wants to do that or needs to do that. Any other questions on sewer scopes, or maybe when to get them? Or
I don't think so.
yeah,
I agree. I always recommend them for older houses, especially.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good idea. Well, we're getting near the wrap up here. I want to close with just some questions. 10 major points that I think it's imperative that no matter who you get to do your home inspection, make sure you ask these questions of the home inspector. Make sure it's being addressed. Number one, make sure your home inspector is licensed. Again, licensing is critical. It's not just a legal issue, but if a home inspector has a license, that means he's certified. That means he's gone through rigorous training. It means he's passed background checks. He's a safe guy to be around and have those keys. But it's relevant and it's important. So make sure your home inspector is licensed.
Can I ask a question? Do you need a license in order to get access to showing time to book the inspections as an inspector?
Well, you need the certification, and that's part of the licensing. So the short answer is yes. And a lot of home inspectors, I go to these CE training things, as we all do, and I meet other home inspectors there, and I'm amazed at how many don't become affiliate members of the local real estate board and get the electronic lock boxes and all these things. I think it's imperative to the business, if for no other reason than to make it easy on the all the realtors that who maybe don't want to get up at 9 o'clock in the morning and be there to let me in. Or sometimes it's an empty house, or there's so many scenarios, but you need access as a home inspector, and to get that access, you have to be licensed.
Yeah.
So it's very important. You have to pass those background checks. The next question, make sure you ask about the roof. And we talked about this earlier, but that's probably one of the major expenses on any home. So the key questions are, how old is it? And do you see any signs of damage, leaking, etc.? Talk about that roof. Structural issues is the next one. Don't gloss over it. Make sure you ask the home inspector, do you see any structural issues with this home? And they should have a very concise answer for you. Seasonal maintenance. I give out a book, a manual. It's directed to first-time home buyers, but everyone likes getting them, and they talk a lot about seasonal maintenance. And even if you've owned a house for 10 years, it's a good idea to read the seasonal maintenance, because, all right, I've got a humidifier, and I forget to change my my humidifier pad. I mean, it's just a good idea. So seasonal maintenance is just a good topic to go over with your home inspector while you're there on site. Another question, talk about egresses, openings for creatures. I'm talking about pests, the rats that we touched on earlier, but mice, bugs. Sometimes there are obvious egresses on a home, gaping holes in the siding or in the foundation, and let's find them, let's talk about them, and more important, let's talk about ways to mitigate those. Let's talk about mold. Now, mold can be a third-party inspector. I'll just be frank, my inspections, I include mold. I'm looking for it. I'm not going to identify the specific strain of mold, but is that relevant? What is relevant? Where's the mold? Where's the water coming from? Without the water, there won't be mold. So let's identify that there is indeed mold, and let's find the source of the water, the moisture, and then let's talk about that, mitigate that problem, and then have the house cleaned for mold, have that mitigated. And sometimes it's very regional, localized, and that's maybe not a big deal. If the mold is pervasive on every cellulose surface in the basement or part of the house, then yeah, you need to have that house treated, and that could get very expensive. So let's talk about mold with your home inspector and make sure that we understand that. Another question, be sure you ask, how does rainwater flow through and around that property? When I say through, you'd be surprised how many, like this 100-year-old house that we just looked at, they would join the rainwater or groundwater, downspouts would often come into the basement and tie into the sewage, and they were all one. Nowadays, homes are built very separate. Groundwater is separated from sewage, and we don't want to overload our sewage system. Now, there is no obligation to, unless there's extensive plumbing work being done and permits being pulled, there's no obligation to make an old house separate. But let's talk about how the rainwater, specifically groundwater, moves around that house. And by that, I mean gutters are overflowing, downspouts are just directed right next to the foundation with no diverters or no extensions, or the drain lines themselves for the downspouts are clogged and overflowing. And even if it's not raining, a good home inspector should be able to spot signs of that. Like you can see overflow marks. I mean, if you're looking for it, you know what to look for. And I think even a layman could look at that and say, hey, we got a problem here. So let's have that conversation with your home inspector. Let's talk about the insulation with your home inspector. You know, when you see him dirty and irritable crawling out of the attic, ask him, hey, how's that insulation looking up there? And there are modern standards. It is 13 inches for modern homes. Again, there's no obligation to bring an old house up to modern standards, but let's have that conversation. I always point out in my inspections, what are the modern standards and where do you rate? You know, well, you've only got 4 inches up there or none at all, or vermiculite, and that's a separate conversation. Vermiculite can have asbestos in it, and you know that would go back to the asbestos, which I note in the front part of the report under general. This homes of this age are known to have asbestos, and be on the lookout for it. If I'm going through the report with my client and I see asbestos, I'll point it out. 9-inch squares, what looks like vinyl, but if they're 9 inches, they've got some asbestos in them. Often old boilers, the pipes will be wrapped with asbestos. It'll be that white, papery looking product. Sometimes it looks like an old cast, the old plaster cast. Those are usually asbestos on the old boiler pipes. But back to the I'm sorry. Oh, I'm getting it. Okay, back to
What happened?
Can you mute?
Yes.
So back to the main question, what's your insulation efficiency, and have that conversation with your inspector so you know, oh, well, I've got no insulation. I better bump that up or I'm going to be paying some exorbitant bills, especially in an older home like this. Another question, make sure you ask, how old are the windows? You saw in this inspection, we had a lot of compromised windows, defective windows. If you see more modern windows, especially the vinyl windows, if you lower the upper sash, if it's movable, a double hung, there's often a sticker up there, and it'll often have the date. And if you just look at it, you'll know how old your windows are. A good lifespan for, I'll just say a mid-range vinyl replacement window is 20 to 25 years. After that, I almost expect, especially on the west side of the house, southwest side that gets the hot afternoon sun, that'll compromise those seals, and those seals are probably shot. So I look at those very carefully. And we talked earlier about that when we were talking about windows. But it's a good idea to know how old they are so you know maybe what you're looking at coming down the road. And then the last question, make sure you ask them about the electrical system and is it up to code. Now, we had this conversation a little earlier, no obligation to bring it up to code, but there is absolutely an obligation to make it safe. Let's talk about that with your home inspector, both the code side of it and the hazard or safety side of it, and the difference between the two, and what they should expect moving forward. And the realtor will probably want to be a part of that conversation as well, because that all goes back to the negotiation process. Well, that is all I have. Any questions about the process or what to expect?
I guess I always mention sometimes buyers, especially first time buyers, feel like the inspection period is really short. And I always say inspectors are used to those timelines. And you guys are really heroes. You make yourselves available on really short notice and come out and do a super thorough job. And you're always available to answer questions afterwards. And we just really appreciate everything you do.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the referrals. I love working with realtors and clients. My business, like yours, it's a people business, and you have to have good people skills. And actually, for me, it's just be there for your client. Put them first, And if you have the well-being of your client out there first, then you're always going to do the right thing. And just be there, answer their questions, and take care of them.
Yeah. Well, thank you. For your time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I enjoyed being here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.